Guys, tonight I wanted to talk James Degale, specifically an article on Boxing Scene which has quotes from Jim McDonnell, Degale's trainer. The article refers to 3 potential opponents for Degale's next fight on the basis that he doesn't get to fight with Carl Froch, and to be honest, that fight with Carl Froch looks near impossible. You know, Carl Froch obviously has other options on the table. It seems clear to my eye he's not overly worried about vacating that belt, or he's at least prepared to do so in search of international fights, etc. So that belt's going to become vacant. Now, I don't have a clear understanding, and I'd be interested if anyone does to receive a comment on this, because I thought it was quite clear. If Carl Froch vacates that IBF belt, the next fight would be a mandated fight for the vacant title between IBF 1 and IBF 2. That's James Degale and that's Andre Dirrell. I thought that fight would be clear cut. But having watched several interviews with Eddie Hearn on IFL TV as well as other sources, and having looked at these new reports on Boxing Scene, it doesn't seem like James Degale Dirrell is a certainty. In the article, Jim McDonnell refers to other opponents. I'll touch on those in a moment. I've seen Eddie Hearn on numerous occasions say that he'd like to make James Degale versus George Groves in the first half of 2015. So I don't understand the circumstances. Is James Degale... Eddie Hearn says he thinks he could get Degale Groves for a world title fight. How? George Groves is mandatory on the WBC route, but he can't get that belt because Anthony Dirrell holds it. He can't get it for the IBF belt, I don't believe, or can he? If somebody knows how he can get Groves Degale for the IBF belt, please do let me know, because I thought it was mandated that Degale would have to fight Andre Dirrell. Now, that fight is a very unattractive fight to a promoter. Andre Dirrell is a very tricky, difficult opponent. He's not going to create a stylistically interesting fight to the casual fan. He's not a huge name to the casual fan, but he's a very difficult, tricky customer who could cause problems for any fighter on his day. So, I can understand why they don't want the Andre Dirrell fight if they can at all avoid it. The risk-reward just isn't there. However, whenever I listen to James Degale speak, and whenever I listen to Ambrose Mendy speak, the talk is that James Degale is going straight away for a world title and they want the quickest route to the world title. So I know Andre Dirrell is a difficult fight, but this does represent... for me, I just don't understand the circumstances here. Eddie Hearn has referred to the George Groves fight. My understanding, what I'm told, the rumours I'm hearing, is that George Groves isn't overly keen on that fight. He's looking to win a world title against the other Dirrell, Anthony Dirrell, and he's mandatory for the WBC route. So, possibly, Groves goes and fights for the WBC belt, and if he wins that, a fight could be set up with Groves defending the title against James Degale. Maybe that is one way this all works out. But the opponent's now being mentioned for Degale, and it doesn't look like the Carl Froch fight is going to happen. My gut instinct, having seen quotes from Jim McDonnell, having seen quotes from Eddie Hearn, is that the Andre Dirrell fight is not going to happen. Now, the opponents being mentioned are Kessler and Rocky Fielding. Now, Kessler isn't ranked by the IBF. Rocky Fielding's ranked number 9. Kessler, I know, was looking for a big fight, a return fight against Carl Froch. I guess the James Degale Kessler fight is, a possibility. Kessler's a big name. I hope Eddie Hearn doesn't try and put James Degale Kessler as a pay-per-view. It wouldn't surprise me if that is the route he wants to go down. I know Kessler will want a big payday for the fight, and of course it is an opportunity for Kessler to regain huge relevancy in the division should he beat Degale. But that's a fight, that as far as I can see it, doesn't get Degale a world title shot. Kessler's been hugely inactive. Kessler isn't ranked with the IBF or with the governing bodies. How does a Degale Kessler fight achieve that goal? I understand maybe it's worth waiting, you know, if they can get a fight against George Groves, or if they can get a fight in the summer, maybe it is worth having one more fight before going for the world title. But how many times is this? Final eliminator against Brandon Gonzalez. He then took a tough fight against Marco Antonio Periban. Why is it that the Gale's accepting another real tough fight before fighting for the world title? I don't get it. Rocky Fielding, I don't like that fight. Don't get me wrong, I think James wins, and James wins easily. But from Eddie Hearn's perspective, as the promoter, I don't know what he's doing. You know, he promotes both guys. He's actually done a fairly credible job with Rocky Fielding. He's taken him from prize fighter to Commonwealth Championship to being a ranked fighter with the governing bodies. And what's the point of putting in all that work with Rocky Fielding just to have him destroyed by James Degale? You know, surely there's ways of progressing Rocky's career better. There's ways of making big money for Rocky. A Liverpool fight with Callum Smith. Paul Smith we expect to be unsuccessful against Arthur Abraham. Perhaps Rocky Fielding versus Paul Smith for the British title. You know, there are huge fights in Liverpool for Rocky Fielding against the likes of Callum Smith, against the likes of Paul Smith. You know, Eddie Hearn's done a good job of building him up, of advancing him, of putting him in the right place. Why waste it? You know, Rocky Fielding, James Degale, it's a fight I'd watch, you know, I'd enjoy it. But nobody thinks Rocky Fielding could be competitive in that fight. At this point, Rocky Fielding is 5 fights away from that. James Degale is a different gravy to Rocky Fielding. You know, I see that fight, I see James Degale humiliating Fielding in that fight. You know, Fielding just doesn't have the... It's not even worth comparing their attributes. They're worlds apart at this point. You know, a fighter like Paul Smith is a much better pest for Rocky Fielding than a guy like James Degale. So I'm just not sure. I mean, Rocky Fielding, Mikhail Kessler, these are the names mentioned by Jim McDonnell in the article on Boxing Scene. But what's the point? They're 2 tough fights. They don't get him the world title fight. They don't get him the big money payday with Carl Froch. They don't get him the big money payday with George Groves. And you can't just leave James to wait to see if George Groves beats Anthony Dirrell. George Groves may offer James a title shot. I mean, let's not forget, George hates James Degale, and I expect George probably to lose to Anthony Dirrell. So you can't just wait. You know, why not? You know, if Froch won't fight him, if Groves won't fight him, in my opinion, they need to stop fucking around with the guy. You know, they've made him fight a tough, undefeated fighter, trained by Virgil Hunter and Gonzalez. They've made him fight Marco Antonio Periban. You know, we need... This guy is raw talent. He's one of the best fighters in the UK, if not the best fighter in the UK. And, you know, if people are avoiding him, if Carl Froch doesn't want to fight him, if George Groves doesn't want to fight him, then perhaps if he wins a world title, he can, you know, be getting in more competitive fights because people want to win the belt. I mean, I can understand from a business perspective why you'd want to avoid Andre Dirrell. He doesn't bring much money, much fanfare, much attention, and it's a tough fight. But otherwise, all you're doing is destroying one of your other prospects in Rocky Fielding, and waiting with James Degale, hoping things fall in the right direction with Froch and Groves. You know, I could see Froch and Groves both losing in their next fight, I really could. And then where does that leave Degale? Those big fights, those big paydays disappear, and he doesn't even have a belt. If he gets a belt, you know, at least then we could start talking unification fights. We could start talking about him facing a returning Andre Ward. You know, we could start talking about him with fighters from America going over there maybe, you know. But the Rocky Fielding fight I hate. It destroys Rocky, who needs more time, and it doesn't do anything for James's career. The Kessler fight is a tough fight against a guy who isn't ranked. You know, if you're going to step it up against a tough opponent, you may as well fight Dirrell. He's at least got the belt. As you can probably tell by my 10-minute plus rant, I'm slightly confused. I don't understand what Eddie Hearn's playing at. James Degale has the potential to be a pound-for-pound star for years to come. He's got the potential to lead the Matchroom stable. I know he may not be the most charismatic guy, he may not be the best talker, he may not be the most likeable, but this guy has talent beyond belief. And I just wonder how many more fighters he's going to have to go through before he gets to a promised land of a world title. And I think if he wins that world title, it's much easier to set up future fights with the likes of Froch, future fights with the likes of Groves, even a fight with Paul Smith if he beats Abraham. You know, if you can build these fights as unification matches, they're more likely to happen. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching.